And it needs to stop. So just so you're aware. Trust me, I have had a million Mentos over the last day and a half. This is unacceptable. Our next presenter, though, is going to be Kate Pearce. I'm not going to do an intro. I think she's going to do a great introduction for herself, but she's going to be talking on the Balkanization of security community. Please welcome Kate.
All right, so those of you who have seen me before or were here about 5 minutes ago will know, as I said, I do not really need amplification. I've got this. Usual starting slide about me. Who am I? Kate Pearce. If you wish to yell at me, complain at me, tell me I'm wrong, whatever on Twitter, there you go. I work for Cisco. However, as per standard megacorp disclaimer, all views are my own. Now, this is also a different talk to what I normally do, because I normally do technical talks. I normally talk about specific technical things. Yes, they're all technical. Maybe not the last one. We were singing about exploits, though. So yes, the stuff I've done in the past has been multipath filter evasion, to go straight through network defenses by fragmenting across different connections. HTTP2 and QUIC, new network protocols that walk straight through old network protections. My recent stuff is on gaslighting for defense, where I present attackers with fake vulnerabilities, but I present each attacker with a different set, so that when they present them to their friend's like, bro, that doesn't work. And I mess with their sense of reality. And the hacker chorus is something which I still can't believe happened. There are, however, witnesses in the audience. When I keynoted at UnrestCon in Melbourne last year, somehow we got the entire 250 person audience singing, sober, to the tune of Amazing Grace about exploiting things. It was hilarious. And I lost my place, and one of the people in the audience here, who I will not point out, took over and continued leading. Yeah, I tend to be very high energy, as you've already picked up, but I also feel strongly about inclusion in our industry and doing different things different ways rather than reinforcing our echo chamber. Yellow. People imprint on it. People remember it. That's all you remember about me? Remember the yellow. Then when I walk around in this, you'll be like, that's that loud person. Also, lately, I've been working on B-Sides Wellington. Same time of year when the late KiwiCon was. And we really would like any submissions. It would be great. Let's build the community. But really, what am I here to talk today? I'm here to talk about small differences and the big difference they make. The small differences we have between our different communities, between our different people, and how we let them sort of divide us. So let's take something that's well understood. Let's go with film and literature. OK, so you've got fiction and nonfiction. Pretty simple, pretty obvious. Let's break that down a bit. Let's dive into fiction. What do we have inside fiction? We have a few different things. This is just a subset that I stole from the Wikipedia page. Let's dive into one of them. Let's dive into science fiction. OK, what have we got in there? Oh, look, we have a few more genres. OK, so we're multiple levels down. And if we keep diving, we dive into space, it continues. We get more breakdown. And then under each of them, we get some familiar friends. Star Wars, Star Trek. Do not mix them up. Do not mix them up in this crowd. You will suffer. And it'll be hilarious. Now, this is really, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, a tiny difference. But we are not the rest of the world. Oh, no. We're not even close. Millions of people care. Millions of people write articles. Millions of people read articles. Yeah, small differences, big difference. And I'm not saying that they don't matter, because if I say that they don't matter, I may not make it out of here alive. And I don't know which of those sets of fans scares me more. Or maybe it doesn't matter. But those small differences and the big difference they make leads to a couple of takeaways from my opening here. Small differences really do make a big difference. I think I've said that 4 times so far. Let's make it a 5th. Small differences make a big difference, especially when humans are involved. We like dividing ourselves. We like understanding what we are not. And there's been many, many different memes about this. This is one that I came across on Reddit recently. And there are many more. How different people in different groups within technology communities view each other. This is a common meme. What my friends think I do, what my parents think I do, what professionals think I do, in this case, what the NSA thinks I do, what I think I do, and what I actually do. The fact is, irrespective of what each group thinks they are doing, the same thing is occurring. It's about perspective. It's about differences. And why am I talking about this? What motivated this? Well, first of all, I do a lot of international consulting. And in that, I travel and do with customers from different cultures, different verticals, different everything. And every one of them is different. Every one of them has its own culture. Its own culture shock, if you will. This is not just countries. This is companies. This is not just companies. This is verticals. This is teams within them. And then I came back to New Zealand, and I went to all of the things, because that's what I do. I go to that meetup, that event, that conference, that thing. And why am I here again? I don't know, but I'm here. And what I keep finding is that they're fragmented, that I don't see a lot of people at more than a couple of the things. Everybody is going to the thing where they feel comfortable, where they feel they belong, and yeah, not many at multiple things, and people are just not mingling across communities. And as a result of that, I get hilarious conversations at one event complaining about another group that they don't actually talk to. And that gets painful, because a lot of people talk about cooperation and working together, but not many actually do it. So we talk at AusCERT, of course, about this united we stand, which, I'm going to throw up there for no reason. Who is we? What do we mean by united, and what do we mean by stand? Well, I don't know. I didn't dig into that. That seems like way too much work. But that was another thing motivated this. The theme of this year's conference. How do we work together to achieve our common goals? So when I'm doing research into the psychology of this stuff and how it all works, I come across a few phrases, and I hear these quite a bit. This one should look familiar. I wish other people would recognize the authority of my group. Okay. What about my group is extraordinary? Where have we heard that before? I won't be happy until my group gets the recognition it deserves. We really deserve this, and I insist that we get that recognition. But no one understands that we don't get that recognition, and no one understands how important we are, and this is collective narcissism. These are quotes from the collective narcissism entry, because as groups, we start to define ourselves and complain in these consistent ways. It's just human nature. Collective narcissism. But I've heard every one of those phrases at different events from different people. But as I say, it's not our fault. It's just the way that communities work. And that's an earthquake joke, which Australians won't really get, so I'll move on. People are not... How would I phrase this? Let's restart. People are good at separating into groups, good at defining who we are. They're really good at that. And they're also good at defining who other people are. Like, if there's one thing that humans can do without help, it's this. And sometimes what you define your own group to be and what someone else defines your group to be don't agree. And that's where it gets really messy. And that's where a concept like the charged word that I used in the title of this talk, like Balkanization, matters. Balkanization happened as a result of various larger empires falling apart, and the people at the lower levels trying to find identity and to scrabble for that identity. And remember, every one of these changes probably involved a lot of conflict, a lot of death, and harm. This is what happens when your high-level and your low-level identity don't agree, when the groups you think you belong to and the groups you actually belong to break up. And it just keeps going. And this is the way human societies keep doing it. And this happens at large scale, but it also happens at smaller scale. And as I said, that is a charged term. It's a pejorative term. And I'm not going to use it for the rest of this talk. However, people generally know what it means. The reason it's a pejorative term is because there's nothing Balkan about fragmentation. That's just the modern contemporary example. Because if you want other examples, ask the USSR, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the British Empire, Ottoman Empire. Things break up. That's nothing to do with the Balkans. That's just a fragmentation when external and internal groups don't agree. And yeah, I'm going to use the word fragmentation from here on. So let's do that. A phrase that many will have heard, one person's freedom fighter is another person's rebel. It's the same within our communities. One person's idealistic thought leader is another person's sellout. And that builds again and again and again. Or as I've got here, one person's sellout is another person's thought leader, is another person's change maker. It's all about perspective. But fragmenting isn't always bad. Sometimes it's good. There's good and there's bad. And between those, so a good one, you get to decide your own destiny. But at the same time, they can cost you from fighting, from lost shared opportunities. So we need to work together. We need to stand united. And we fragment for various reasons, many of them historical, as I gave there with the various empires in the various countries. But there are other reasons too. And a key one is assortative mixing. What this is, in short, is that like is attracted to like, or like is biased to like. We tend to associate with those with whom it is most efficient to communicate with and to work with, and they tend to be the most like us. Now this is, yeah, like me is stickier than not like me. But this is not just a human thing. This is, you see this in chemistry and biology and computer networks. You see this in all sorts of places. This is just a characteristic of adaptive systems. And when you see this assortative mixing in humans, it has a different name, homophily. Or, again, because why would I write my own definitions when Wikipedia has them? I do have other sources, but the Wikipedia ones are the easiest to cite, because they're that long, not that long. And yeah, it's about the common characteristics. And this is a key thing to be aware of, especially with yourself. And some example biases, and there are lots of them, are background or context. Where do you come from? What was your path to where you are? Your goals. Are you going for risk or compliance? What company do you work for? What's your experience, your management level, your technologies, your country, your culture, and more. We like breaking ourselves down. We like associating with those who hit the labels we associate with ourselves. But, and I'm going to get to an industry point here eventually. We have different incentives, we have different goals, we have different perspectives. And dealing with not like me is a lot harder than dealing with like me. And then we get to the issue of trust groups. Trust groups are one of the least diverse types of organization you will ever find, particularly those with vouching, because they tend to take this sort of association, this sort of mixing, and they magnify it. They can become echo chambers very quickly if they're not careful. And that might be relevant for this community. Make sure that you go and you expose yourself to different groups, because the trust groups breed that similarity. And how many diverse trust groups do you actually know? Whatever metric you want. But let's start doing what I said was bad earlier and defining identities on others, because I didn't learn from colonialism. So when I talk about security, what do I mean? What is security? It's about preventing, detecting, responding, recovering, managing the probability, like impact or chance of it actually happening in the first place, or is it about the impact? What do we mean when we say security or security person? It's messy. But what is a security person? Is that a builder or a breaker? Is that a defender? Or perhaps a hunter, an assessor? Why have I got hunter twice? A repairer, an operator, a regulator, an enforcer. There are all of these different labels you can apply to yourself. Now, the trick is more than one of these may apply to you. Yeah, why not? So let's quickly go through these. As I go through each label, put up your hand if you believe it applies to you. And look around and see if the people around you would apply that label and whether you would apply it to them. So who in this room thinks of themselves as a builder? Look around, people, look around. All right. Who thinks of themselves as a breaker? All right. What about defenders? I'd expect that in this crowd. Hunters? Yeah, few of them. Assessors? Yep. I'm going to skip the second hunter. Repairers or fixers? There's a few of them as well. Okay. Operators? Regulators? Enforcers? Now, did many people look around and see people associating with things that you didn't think they thought of themselves as? Or did you find yourself having to think, does this apply to me? Because the more we use these labels, the more we fragment, it gets interesting. And if we define these communities, whether it's by goal or by activity or vertical or mechanism or education or philosophy or experience or whatever it is, we get different things. Well, look, this will be fun. And I'm not actually going to go through all of these, but these are some of the many different ways, different dimensions that you can start breaking down security people. Some of them. This is not exactly a full taxonomy. And every one of them applies to a different person in a different combination. But all too often we're like, oh, those hackers, or oh, those, those compliance box tickers, or whatever pejorative term we want to use. Because to us, labels matter, particularly labels for other people. But the groups that I'm going to use, I'm not going to use that many. That's way too many, and I'll stop tapping that. I'm going to simplify this down. I'm going to use a far smaller number of groups. Start with academic, public, private, and independent. Okay? And then under them, you've got your teachers, researchers under your academics. Under public, you've got your military, your intelligence, regulators, law enforcement, and more. And under each of these, you've got more and more and more different types of people. But I'm not going to use all of these. I'm going to clump them up again. It's something to do, clump them up. Let's start breaking them down into a different taxonomy. So you've got your academic, your public, your private, and your independent. And I'm going to throw those ones from earlier. It's going to matter under each of them. What is their goal? Public, you can have either mission-driven or protection-driven. Private, you can have money-driven or membership-driven. And under independent, you've got this sort of weird combination of curious and ideological and chaotic. And yes, I did consider mapping against the D&D matrices. It didn't quite work. Or rather, there were too many of them in the one box. And yeah, we start placing all of these on there. But I'm not going to throw that many groups at you. I'm going to simplify. So I've got academics, which I'm going to define as those who teach or do disciplined research. Military or intelligence, those who are mission-driven. Enforcers, those who are protection or regulation-driven. Business, those who are driven by profit, loss, and missing brackets. Industry, which is the membership-driven organizations. You'll be familiar with them. There might be one around here. And how do you group independent people? How do you herd cats? Well, I've called them wildcards. Those of you who are never quite sure what you get. But a key point of this talk in the end, this is fun. I love teaching people concepts like this by stealth, is intersectionalism. Every person has a whole lot of different things that tie into their identity. And if you clump them into too granular a group, you're actually not talking about a person, you're talking about a caricature. And you're trying to interact with a person that doesn't exist, and most of the time that's going to annoy them. And, yeah, like, how 1990s is that? But there is a contentious point coming. I would argue that security is not a high-status position in most organizations. We pretend it is. Most organizations do not gladly listen to us. They do not gladly follow us because we're difficult to deal with. We say no a lot. And, yeah, that status isn't that high. And in practice, it's often even lower than it is professed to be. Now, this is improving. You look at something like where the CISO reports to. That is changing over time. That is moving up the org structure. But if you don't believe security was low status, at some points it was common for CISOs to be reporting 5 or 6 levels down. That's not a high status. That's a lackey. And that makes it hard, because if we can't get status within organizations, often we'll try and get it within our own communities or within our own companies horizontally. I should stop fumbling. But yeah, and getting that status is hard, because we tell ourselves that it's high status. We tell ourselves that it's, it's a great job. It's great to be in. But often it's really, really hard. Often we're at the coalface. Only they've taken our pickaxes away and given us like sticks. And then the sticks are too expensive, so they've replaced them with toothpicks. Okay, fine, the toothpick's not very good. I'll give you a metal toothpick. Have fun. But it's okay, because we're really respected professionals and our organizations rely on us. Often not so much, because that's just the way business and the world works. So we need to work with each other. That's how you make that change. Because, at least we were right. It sounds like the stuff at the start. And it's difficult, and I as a security practitioner say this, but one of the reasons we're highly paid is not because of our status. It's because the risk of not having us is very expensive, even if we don't actually do anything good. Doesn't matter whether they measure our outcome. If the accusation is, well, you have no security team, you're going to get hit a lot harder than if you have a bad one, or if you have an under-resourced one. And that hurts. I've gone to things where they tell people, go into it, make change. And sometimes you can. But particularly when you're in an organization, you're struggling to make the best with the things you have available. And if you're a consultant, you go in, you break, and you leave. That doesn't make change either. We make change over long periods of time, not because of our status. Skip that one. So yeah, everyone's having a different life to everybody else. And just because they don't act like you doesn't mean they are wrong. And this is a hard one, because sometimes, from your perspective, they are wrong. And if they were in your job, that would be the wrong choice. But they're living that different life. And they're also not wrong if they don't act like you expect. And if they don't act according to your knowledge and priorities, again, this is theory of mind. And this is one of the key things I want to get across to you, is there are certain things each of those groups do that really get to the others. What are the things they complain about? What are the faux pas? What is the culture shock? Because that's what this is. And if I'm telling you to go to these different events, well, if you're used to hanging around with C-level, and then you walk into a hackathon, you're going to be uncomfortable. And culture shock's going to kick in. I love abusing animation sometimes. This disorientation we get, from this unfamiliarity. The feeling of disorientation experienced by someone when they are suddenly subjected to unfamiliar culture, unfamiliar way of life, and an unfamiliar set of attitudes. That is what we get when we try and work with others. And that culture shock is not their problem, culture shock is yours to deal with. And this is hard. This is really hard. I went to India for the first time for a customer a few months ago. It was so confusing and intense. But that wasn't their problem to deal with, that was mine. And you're going to get culture shock when you interact with different people. And there are various ways of dealing with it, and you can go and look up the Wikipedia on culture shock if you want. But after time, you start to deal with this. We start to adapt. You get excited, and then we get angry, and then we go through these processes. And you do this. New consultants do this with new customers. New people do this in new jobs. You do this in new organizations. And when you're interacting in different communities, you will go through this same process. Skip that one. So I said that I'd go through what are these faux pas? What are the things you do that upset others? So let's start with academics. And as I said, I defined them. I've already defined these. I'll skip through. I did make a grid. It was unreadable. I'm not giving you a grid. But if you wanted to look up what do I do to not piss off these people, you could do this. Or I'm going to go through this way. If you're an academic, how do you annoy each of these groups? I'm sorry, how do you avoid ignoring each of these groups? Academics often upset government people by publishing stuff without fully understanding what harm that will do. Regularly. They also upset the enforcement community by either training students and letting them loose, or by experimenting with things. Actually, no, just experimenting with things upsets the people who like rigid understanding. Academics upset business people because, oh, you trained them, I can't use them. Or because you've made something and it's useless, whether it's research or whether that's people. And then academics go and upset industry by reinventing the wheel, rediscovering the wheel, inventing a better wheel that'll only hold negative loads, or really bizarre things. But they upset the independent people, and some of this has hit me when I was acting as a security consultant. Academics will often not cite grey literature. I've had someone reuse my black hat work and say, we're the first to publish this. You quoted me, but because it wasn't peer-reviewed to your standard, you're claiming it's novel. That's a way to really alienate communities if you're an academic. And studying things that don't matter yet, or that don't matter anymore, or being too rigorous. Oh, but that's no fun. Well, yeah, but you actually don't know what you're talking about. You found a shiny bug under a rock and then said that you've discovered something. But you don't know what it means, you don't know where that goes. And so it's a very different way of approaching the world. I love this one because they annoy everyone the same way. They don't explain, and they don't share. And that's basically what their job is. That's how they work. If you're in that space, not talking is like the key job requirement. So whenever you can give the illusion of sharing, do it. Whether or not it's actually sharing. Of course, they upset wildcards just by representing the man. But there's not much you can do about that. OK, so what's our next group? How do they annoy everyone? Ooh, what have I got? Oh, the enforcers. Those who go and stop people studying things. Those who get in the way. No, I just want to have fun. What do you mean I can't release my malware? Or they enforce their rules consistently, or they enforce their rules inconsistently, or they make rules, or they don't make rules, or they update rules, or they don't update rules, or they enforce mindlessly. This is just the nature of doing that work. But sometimes a little bit of nuance and perspective, or the appearance of it, will gain you a lot of credibility. Now, how do these people upset industry bodies? Constraining or controlling new standards is a fun one. No, but how do you think of the lawful intercept in that? It's a privacy protocol. Like, it doesn't work like that. And that's hard. And wildcards, again, these people who just like to have fun and feel that they're independent, oh, you ruined my fun, you're overreacting. Why are you doing that? Or, oh, you're just mindlessly telling me no. OK, so these are simple things to say. These are not simple things to not do. And if you're business, this is always a fun one. Business often complains about there not being enough novel stuff. They don't want to fund the development of it. They complain there's not enough students. They never want to actually hire them until they've got experience. This is one of my bugbears. Don't complain about them not training students if you won't hire the students they train to your standard. Vendor capture is a fun one, where a vendor basically takes over and defines an entire industry to their own benefit. Or, sorry, let me flip that. Where an industry body is taken over by a vendor to the vendor's benefit. Standards bodies can be very vulnerable to this. So can certain industry organizations. A vendor comes in, they throw their money, their people, and suddenly they're on the board and they're setting the rules. And that can really be a problem. They make secure standards, they make insecure standards, and that upsets, well, you can't win that one. Vendor capture again for business, or for learning slowly. And vendor capture might be a theme. And this is a real problem with particularly any vendor that makes product, but also services. They work in their own interest, and over time they start to shape everything to their own interest, and not to the interests of their customers or the shared goals of the industry. This is something to be very careful of. Again, you make secure standards, you make insecure standards, either way you're going to lose. Someone's going to complain. They can't see through it, they can't play with it, it's not open, or it's open and they... And so anything you can do just to at least acknowledge this understanding is really, really key. And of course, the wildcards. I'm going to read the wrong slide. I should read the right one. Or I should just not read them. Yeah. Industry, taking without giving. Every vendor will do this to a point. They don't want to do that. Vendor capture happens with these guys as well. Already covered that one. The wildcards are the hardest people to keep happy because they think of themselves the most highly and they're the least pragmatic. Academics think that the wildcards aren't rigorous because they're not in most cases. They release dangerous things. Yep, but they're fun. Or they break rules, or they release dangerous things. Again, seems familiar. Business is like, but you're not making any money. Yeah, but it's fun. Or, but it's interesting. And you're releasing dangerous things again. Or you're not cooperating. So there are common trends you start to see with each of these groups. And each of the other groups has conflicting goals. So what I'm encouraging you to be is a bridge between these different communities. Because even if all you do is join 2 of them, that makes a difference. A bridge connects multiple groups, groups that are highly connected to themselves. And you should really try to be a bridge. And I'm going to speed up a little for time. Wow, this slide is big. Given time, I'm not going to go through this because I'm going to skip to the next slide. But if anyone wants to take a photo, I'll give it a few seconds. These are the different ways that I've defined each of these groups. And when you're working with them, how do you understand them? How do you understand how they think of themselves? What are they trying to achieve? And how do you prove to yourself the value of what you are doing? This makes a difference. Even putting in a couple of these things will make a huge difference when interacting with these groups. And how do you deal with each of them? How do you serve them? Well, if you're dealing with academics, cite their work. Not citing is basically slapping them. That's what they work for. That defines their success in their institutions. It defines their success in their own minds. People seeing and recognizing it. But at the same time, don't expect immediate results. And don't come and say, I'm going to give you money to study this if you get that outcome. Because that is seen as very offensive, but it's very easy to do. And don't require proof of value before proof of validity. What do I mean by that? Don't require a business case for the thing they haven't found yet. I see that all of the time from funding bodies. These guys, pass on tips, don't expect to hear anything back. Just say, here's something you might want to look at. Bye. Don't ask questions. Seriously, don't ask questions. That way lies bad places for you. And talk about what you do with them if you're able to. Because sometimes they can use that, but you'll never know. You're throwing it into the abyss, and the abyss tells you to go away. It's not answering questions. I'm not yelling back. Yeah, it's really key to work with these groups. The enforcers, you tell them when the rules make sense. You don't complain about all the bad ones, and only that. And if you do have someone they should go and deal with, let them know. Don't just whine about them not dealing with it. The one that particularly bugs me when people are dealing with this group is, oh, but it's not perfect, so it's a waste of time. Compliance isn't security. No, but non-compliance is probably insecurity in most cases. That means they are still raising that floor. Don't go and argue that a stupid rule shouldn't be enforced, because that's not their choice. And don't ignore or break rules because you think they're stupid, because that ends really badly for you. In the same way, with business, try and get numbers, try and get metrics, try and, speak their language. But don't argue morality. I've had hackers argue, oh, but it's irrelevant. They're an amoral entity. They don't understand that. And of course, this is one largely that security people and technologists do is, oh, but more security is always better. No, out of business is always worse. Be pragmatic. Understand that zealotry, soapboxes, don't keep you in business very long. Now, when dealing with these industry organizations, understand their goal, understand their members' goals. Don't understand your own goals, because they're there to represent someone. They're a political organization in most cases. They're a governance body. And also, don't go preaching against their members, because it's not their fault who their members are usually. That's who they're there to represent. It's like going and arguing against a politician about their base. That's irrelevant. They're there to represent them, not to argue with you. And don't insult their members. Don't go and say, oh yeah, but all your people are a bunch of hacks and sellouts. Because then they're never going to work with you again, because all you've done is show an antagonism. Wildcards, motivations, and appreciation. These are people who want respect. These are people who want to feel loved, but feel that their work is loved and it's not personal in the same way. Don't bother discussing pragmatic solutions, which is a direct contradictor to one of the other groups, because it's not about pragmatism. Don't insult their honor. Oh God, don't insult their honor. Don't insult their work, especially on the internet, unless you really are as good as you think you are, because they will prove if you're not. But all of these groups have commonalities, so you don't go insulting their work. We have pride in our work. All of us do. We think we're doing the right thing, and we do the best we can. And we have a different life and a different work life than you. So let's start summing up. So don't go mistaking difference for wrongness. And don't expect other cultures to play by your rules. Don't go in convinced of your own superiority. So that's the don'ts. What are the do's? How can you make this work together? Well, you regularly go to at least one thing that's not your normal echo chamber and actually talk to people. That makes a huge difference. You just do that every now and then, and you'll start getting different perspectives and different ideas. But do expect the culture shock that comes with that, and find your common ground and work with that. If you're comfortable, you're not reaching out far enough, and we're not actually trying to work together. And yeah, that's how we're going to stand united, is by actually finding our common goals, working together on the things we agree on, and ignoring the things we don't. Because the enemy of your enemy is your friend, even if they are actually your enemy. That is actually a key thing to think through, is you might have a common goal, even if it is simply dealing with that. Don't get distracted by the stuff that you're not got in common, because all it will do is build antagonism. Work together. If anyone wants me to go back to those slides, let me know and I can zoom, but I think we're out of time. Yeah. All right, I'll hang around. If I'm in yellow, I'm easy to find. If I'm not, I'm hidden.
Thanks very much for your presentation. Really appreciate it.